This week we focus on 2024. It's the election year. More than 50 countries going to polls. We'll decode some of the most important countries. But first up, the headlines this week. A cargo ship with 15 Indians hijacked off Somalia. All Indian crew on board rescued. Swift action by Marines from the INS. Chennai saves the day. And the 2024 poll season kicks off with Bangladesh. Bangladesh votes after violence hit campaign. Bangladesh's key opposition party boycotts the polls. The big question, will Dhaka shrug off the unfair poll charge? The Pakistan polls are postponed. The Senate passes a resolution. Pakistan lawmakers cite security and weather concerns. And India's big power play in Nepal to counter China. Kathmandu to supply 10,000 megawatts of hydropower to India over the next 10 years. Jaishankar inks key deals with Nepal and also visits the Pashupatinath temple. The big concern abroad, another Hindu temple attacked in California in the US. The Hindu American Foundation claims that the temple was smeared with pro-Khalistan graffiti. Elections in the UK. Rishi Sunak rules out the possibility of the polls in May. He eyes a second half of the 2024. The big question, will buying time help Labour Party buck anti-incumbency? Sri Lanka denies docking permission to Chinese spy ship and enforces a one-year ban. A big diplomatic and strategic win for India. And what an impassioned appeal. New Zealand's youngest MP's plea breaks the internet. The MP's speech is going viral. And our big focus on India Global this week. 2024 will go down in global history as the biggest election year. More than 60 countries will go to presidential, legislative and local polls. These elections will shake up the global order, redefine democracy in the world and change the fate of more than 60 billion people. New governments will rise in more than half of the world and a new geopolitical reality will be born. From the biggest global powers, the UK and the US, to our immediate neighbours, Pakistan and Bangladesh, these elections across the globe will have far-reaching consequences for India. With our own country, the world's largest democracy, also voting in the massive multi-day polls. But how high are the stakes? Well, let me take you through some absolutely startling numbers that will reveal the reality of these polls. Well, more than half of the world will be voting in these elections, which means 41% of the global population will be casting their ballot. 50 countries are going to the polls. 2 billion voters will be getting their fingers inked and there are 1 million candidates in the fray, which means 42% of the global GDP is in question. But let's also look at the big ideas and what's at stake. It's truly a milestone year for world democracy. And well, of course, India, our own country, will go to polls. The world's largest democracy will be voting in a massive multi-day election. And then our immediate neighbour Pakistan will also go to polls, though the polls have been postponed. And there the big question will be, whether the army will call the shots or will it be a truly free and fair election. Moving now to our other neighbour, Bangladesh, which goes to polls in just 2 days from now. Will there be a pro-China government there amid China's expanding footprint in the Indo-Pacific? That is the big question. And then going to Taiwan. Well, in Taiwan, will the polls escalate its conflict with China? The stakes are high for India as well. Moving then to Indonesia. Well, Indonesia will vote in the largest single-day election in the world. And then South Africa, where it is a big test for Nelson Mandela's party in post-apartheid South Africa. And then the big European Union elections. Well, is it going to be the rise of the far right yet again? That is a big question there. And then in the UK, well, the UK goes to polls amid the cost of living crisis. Can Sunak return or will the Labour Party make a comeback? And then the US, well, in the biggest test for democracy in the States, will Donald Trump return? That is the big question there. And then in Mexico, well, in Mexico too, democracy is on the line with it being a clear contest between democracy and autocracy. But beginning with our immediate neighbour, the world will witness more than one monumental election every month, and the election season begins with Bangladesh. There are concerns over free and fair elections, and democracy is at stake in our eastern neighbour as well. It has larger global implications. Will Bangladesh elect a pro-China government amid China's rising footprint in the Indo-Pacific? That is what we'll all be looking at. Take a look.
মানুষকে ভোট দিতে দেবে না, নির্বাচন বন্ধ করবে, এত সাহস কোথা থেকে পায়?
The world's longest serving female head of government is set to extend her rule.
উন্নতি হচ্ছে।
Bangladesh will go to the polls on January 7th, and most likely the 76-year-old Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina will emerge as winner. With the main opposition parties boycotting the poll and many of their leaders in jail, the ruling Awami League is all set to be re-elected for a fourth straight parliamentary term. The Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or the BNP, the main opposition party, says it has no faith that Sheikh Hasina will hold a free and fair election. India will be watching closely as the strategically important Chicken's Neck runs between Nepal, Bangladesh and Bhutan. It links northeastern states to the rest of India. The area is of great strategic importance, with China just around the corner. While India would most likely want the Awami League government to continue, the US will keep its focus on Sheikh Hasina, as it has been quite critical of her rule. With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report, NDTV.
And NDTV is live in Bangladesh. Saurabh Gupta is on ground zero joining us from Dhaka. Saurabh, while there are a lot of concerns over free and fair polls, the BNP boycotting the elections, but what is the mood on the ground? Are people hopeful of a free and fair election?
Well, that depends on who you ask that question to, and of course there are always two conflicting views and two conflicting opinions depending on the allegiance that an individual has. But given the fact that there are going to be elections, there are certain, of course, standards of democracy that are going to have to be met, and there are observers, and there are, of course, a lot of journalists that have flown in to cover these elections and to really keep an eye on these elections and the questions that you raise. Now, obviously, there are a lot of people who feel that the idea of a caretaker government is not something that perhaps is viable. There are some who feel that free and fair elections without a caretaker government is not possible. The Bangladesh Awami League, which is in power, which is the incumbent government, is definitely against that idea. The BNP stressed on that idea and said it would boycott the polls if that didn't happen. It didn't happen, so the BNP is not really in the fray. So it is an interesting election to watch, and really what we've been talking about also is that Bangladesh is really setting off the election season, if one may call it so. There are elections in so many countries. Bangladesh amongst the first in 2024 to go to polls. Of course, many believe that the results in these elections are a foregone conclusion, predicting a victory for the Awami League led by the incumbent Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina. And also there are several other factors, the economy, all of those things are something that people are keeping an eye on, improving people's livelihoods, incomes. All of these things are going to be factors when people go out and vote. The other interesting thing about the Bangladesh elections is, remember, like in India, we have, of course, a counting date, which is usually a day or two after polling ends. But in Bangladesh, the counting starts soon after polling, and within the next couple of hours or next 5 or 6 hours, you have a fair idea of who's winning the election. All of that is there. Tomorrow, of course, there's a very important briefing by the Bangladesh Election Commission on, how these elections are being conducted, what are the practices that have been put in place. We were just hearing the ambassador, Masood bin Momen, the foreign secretary, who gave us an idea of what these elections are going to be, how they're going to be conducted. So it's an interesting election to watch, and of course we at NDTV will be bringing you live reports from Dhaka, from Bangladesh, as this election gets underway. The elections are on the 7th. And of course, voting will go on the entire day till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, following which counting will start here and we will know the results.
Okay.
This is also an important election for the entire region. So you'll have other countries like India also closely watching this election. Bangladesh is an extremely important partner for India, and therefore a lot is at stake, not just for Bangladesh but for the neighborhood in these elections.
Absolutely, a lot is at stake, Saurabh. As you said, some concerns there as well, and it's so important for democracy to prosper in our neighborhood. Thanks, Saurabh, for joining us with that update. But moving now from our eastern neighbor to the one always on the brink in the west. Well, in Pakistan, it's going to be another chapter in its ever turbulent politics. Will it be a clash of the arch rivals? Well, both Imran Khan and Nawaz Sharif find themselves in a precarious situation. But the bigger question is, will it truly be a free and fair election? Or will elections be held at all, given that a resolution has now been passed to postpone the elections owing to bad weather and security? But if elections are held at all, how high are the stakes and what all is on the line? Take a look at this report. An unprecedented arrest and a dramatic homecoming in the run-up to the big general elections.
आपका मैं दिल से शुक्रिया अदा करता हूं कि आप जिस तरह मेरी कॉल पे हर पाकिस्तान के कोने से आज यहां आए।
हमें एक नए सफर के आगाज की जरूरत है। ये तय करें, आप तय करें कि हम एक नया सफर का आगाज करेंगे, पूरे जोशो खरोश के साथ करेंगे।
A turning point in Pakistan's volatile politics, the 2024 polls will be an existential battle for two of Pakistan's most high-profile and controversial leaders. And human rights bodies, including Pakistan's own watchdog, is already questioning the impartiality of the polls.
At this point, there is little evidence to show that the upcoming elections will be free, fair, or credible.
With Imran in jail and his nomination papers junked, even his party's symbol, the cricket bat, has been snatched away. There have been back-to-back setbacks and humiliations for the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. Not surprisingly, the party has called the elections a sham. With elections just months away, the tables seem to have turned. Imran Khan's long-time rival and former Prime Minister Mian Nawaz Sharif is hopeful of a historic return as Prime Minister. Once considered Pakistan Army's arch nemesis, Nawaz Sharif is now being accused of striking a deal with the army for his return to Pakistan after years of exile. Nawaz Sharif batted for talks with India at his homecoming rally. While the judiciary is yet to decide if Sharif can contest polls, his brother Shehbaz could return as premier. An economy in tatters, militancy resurfacing, and anger peaking among people. Another tumultuous chapter in Pakistan's ever-precarious polity is unlikely to impact India directly, with India's stand vis-à-vis terror and Kashmir firm and unwavering. Vedant Agarwal for NDTV. And joining me now on India Global, Meher Tarar, a senior writer, journalist and columnist from Lahore. Thanks very much, Meher, for joining us on India Global this week. My first question to you, well, there's a lot of buzz around elections in Pakistan, but everybody's concern is whether these elections will truly be free and fair, because, after all, it will be the army calling the shots.
The first question is whether the elections are going to take place or not. That is the fundamental question. Everything else is secondary. A lot of people, including me, do not believe that elections are going to be held on the 8th of February. I don't believe that. And the way things have been happening and the way this resolution has just come up in the Senate today and everybody seconded it. It's a resolution. It's not that it's...
That's an important point you make there, Meher, because that resolution has been passed and now it's seeming more likely that elections will be postponed, could be postponed indefinitely as well. But this means that political instability in Pakistan will continue. What does it mean for Pakistan's economy? Because political instability, of course, means, a continued economic slowdown as well.
Thing is, there's this misconception in Pakistan that whenever martial law, Pakistan is under martial law, the economy is kind of, picks up and things start to get better. There could be like a number of reasons for that, but that is the misconception in Pakistan. But in the last, as I said, in the last 1 year, nobody believes that this caretaker government is capable of taking care of the economy or putting it back in order. But I think they did realize that they need to have elections in the country. But now the two major parties, Pakistan People's Party and Pakistan Muslim League, who conspired to overthrow Imran Khan, now they are in a pickle too. Unless an election takes place, they are nowhere. It's not their prime minister in Islamabad. It's not their chief minister in Lahore, in Punjab, in Balochistan, or anywhere else. So that now that they have no idea how to handle this situation.
Right, Meher, as you point out, well, another tumultuous chapter, another chapter in Pakistan's, turbulent politics, and it's never really good to have, such volatile politics in the neighborhood. But moving now from the neighborhood to the big global powers going to the polls. Well, in the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak, who is particularly popular here for his Indian origin, is battling a series of high-profile resignations, scandals, and accusations of incompetence in handling the economy. This in the run-up to the big elections. The country is battling one of its worst cost of living crises, but it's also a bigger ideological battle. The controversies surrounding Sunak are really impacting his image as a vice politician. In fact, the Conservatives at large, are dealing with 13 years of incumbency, and the rival Labour Party is currently the pollsters' favourite. Now, these elections have ramifications for New Delhi as well. Now, Rishi Sunak and PM Modi's camaraderie is well known, and Rishi Sunak is also looking to clinch the free trade agreement with India by April. So, what does the return of the Labour Party actually mean? It will have wide-ranging ramifications. It's an ideological battle, a battle of personality cults as well. And well, elections not just in the UK but also in the US as well, where there's going to be an interesting battle to watch out for. Will Trump return? That is a big question. Well, joining me now on the broadcast, I'm being joined by Andrew Whitehead, a British journalist. He's joining us live from London. And also with us, Mr. Scott Lucas, somebody who watches the US and the UK very closely. Going across to you, Mr. Whitehead, first. Well, it's going to be an interesting elections in the UK. How high are the stakes for the United Kingdom?
The stakes are very high, and I think the likelihood is that there will be a change of government. The Conservatives have been in power for 14 years, and they're deeply divided, unpopular, and they give every impression of being exhausted. So according to the opinion polls, the opposition Labour Party, the centre-left party, is way ahead. And of course, we've got probably about 9 months to go, and a lot can change. But the likelihood is that there will be a change of governing party, and this will make this a particularly landmark election in recent British history.
Absolutely, Mr. Whitehead. As you said, these are landmark elections, but just looking at an interesting idea, whether it's the US or, to some extent, the European Union and even in India, the rise of the far right is a fascinating one. How do you look at that?
Well, the right has, in historic terms, been in the ascendant, and certainly Narendra Modi is part of that global picture, as has been Boris Johnson and certainly Donald Trump. Of course, it's a mixed picture. We have the Democrats governing in America, and there is at least a chance, though it looks as if it's going to be very close, that Joe Biden will win re-election. Britain is likely to move to the left. Germany has a social democratic government, but then we have hard right parties in power in countries such as Italy. So a very mixed picture, but we have an authoritarian, populist, right-wing current which is coming to the fore, or has come to the fore, in many parts of the democratic world. And for those who are instinctively liberal, that is clearly concerning.
Absolutely, and that rise is really fascinating. But just also looking at the implications for India, well, the Modi-Sunak camaraderie is well known, and also, trade relations have been fairly good between India and the UK in the past couple of years, particularly after Rishi Sunak took over. The Rishi Sunak is also looking to clinch the FTA by April. What could be the implications of the possible return of Rishi Sunak or the comeback of the Labour Party?
I don't think it's going to make a great deal of difference. I think a Labour government, if we get one, is still going to want good relations with India. It's certainly going to still want a trade deal. It's possible that a Labour government will express more concern about what's happening inside India, the perceived threat to civic institutions and the situation of India's Muslims, the position in Kashmir. We haven't heard a lot of that from Rishi Sunak's administration. Labour will probably articulate some of these concerns more loudly, but I don't think those will in any way imperil the desire in both Delhi and London to maintain good relations and expand commercial links.
All right, so fascinating elections there in the UK. Thanks, Mr. Whitehead. But moving now to the US. Well, the US is bracing for the biggest test for American democracy. Can he make a comeback? And can he trump 81-year-old Joe Biden, who is fighting his toughest battle and perhaps his last political campaign? But there's much more at stake. Immigration, gun laws, far-right extremism versus liberal politics, democracy, and the great American dream itself. Well, Trump has vowed retribution on his political opponents and said immigrants pollute American blood. Well, these elections also come amid two raging wars in Ukraine and in Gaza, making the government in the US even more critical for the global order. And well, Professor Scott Lucas is with us. He is Professor Emeritus at University of Birmingham. He watches the US very, very closely. Thanks, Mr. Scott, for joining us on India Global this week. How important are these elections for global economy? Not just the UK, but elections in the US, elections in the European Union. How important are these elections in terms of their timing? Well, these polls come amid a global economic slowdown.
Well, I think it's not an exaggeration to say that these are the most important elections in some of these countries, not just for decades, but indeed going back to the 19th century. I think it's the most important election in the United States since 1865, the most important election in the UK since 1945. And of course, it's a very important year for India in terms of its ongoing developing place within Asia. We're talking about continuing to deal with the economic and social issues after COVID. But having said these global issues are important, I think it's always important to go local. So for example, when we talk about the United States, it's very important to say that this is really an issue of whether the United States system can withstand the efforts by a certain group, and especially by Donald Trump, to tear down that system. Only 3 years. In fact, it's the third anniversary of his attempted coup in 2021. I think in the United Kingdom, the economic damage of Brexit, the unprecedented economic damage of Brexit, and the likelihood that the UK cannot recover from it makes this a special election. And if you talk about India, the question not only of India's aspirations, its economic, its technological aspirations, but the issues of whether communities, different communities, religious and ethnic communities in India, whether all of them have space, have tolerance. I think those are important issues there.
Absolutely. And speaking of the timing, Mr. Lucas, these elections also come amid two raging wars. Of course, the world seems to have lost interest in the Ukraine-Russia war, but that is also very much, ongoing. So how important are these elections in that context? Because the leadership and the governments will have to take critical decisions vis-a-vis their foreign policy at a time of war.
Let's talk about the United States, for example. When we talk about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, probably the biggest threat to European stability since 1945. It is no secret that Russia has interfered in U.S. elections to try to get Donald Trump elected or to support his election. They did so in 2016, and they will do so in 2024, because it is no secret that Donald Trump blackmailed Ukraine in 2019 by freezing military aid unless they dish dirt on his opponent, Joe Biden. It's no secret that Donald Trump would like to bring the United States out of NATO. So Donald Trump is effectively Russia's candidate in that election. It is no secret that when you talk about European elections, that Russia will try to interfere in those elections as well, because they will want to see candidates who are against aid to Ukraine, candidates like Viktor Orban in Hungary, to see them triumph. And then you have the added issue of Israel and Palestine, and specifically Israel and Gaza. And that is, of course, from country to country, what that has done is that it's mobilized people, I think, to really, sort of say, look, is it the case that we should always have a default position of supporting one side or the other? That our candidates should always be pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian? And I think those questions will loom large, but they will differ. The way they play out will be different, including in India, because of the local context.
Absolutely. Mr. Lucas, thanks very much for joining us on India Global this week. So, the stakes are high. These elections will redefine global polity, reshape geopolitical realities and much more. But more than that, it's about human rights and the quality of lives we lead. That's it on this edition of India Global from all of us here. Goodbye.